Snoqualmie Pass is a pass in the Cascade Mountains about an hour's drive east of Seattle, Washington. While Seattle rarely sees any snowflakes, Snoqualmie Pass is actually one of the snowiest places in North America. So in this video, we're going to explore this dichotomy, trying to answer the question, why does Snoqualmie Pass get so much snow? You're listening to a special episode of Cascadia Mountain Weather. My name is Kyle McCrone, and I'm here with Wyatt Mullen. So where is Snoqualmie Pass? Snoqualmie Pass is in the Central Cascades, just east of Seattle. It's north of Mount Rainier, and generally kind of in the center of the state. Now, if you didn't believe me that Snoqualmie Pass is one of the snowiest places in North America, we plotted this average snowfall at a bunch of different famous North American resorts. And Snoqualmie Pass is right in the middle with about 420 inches of annual snowfall. This is comparable to Jackson Hole in Whistler, and it's actually more than Mount Bachelor or Palisades at Tahoe. Now, Wyatt's going to give a climate overview of Snoqualmie Pass.
Yeah, so first we're going to look a more general kind of overview of what happens exactly over the year through at Snoqualmie Pass. And then later in the video, we'll dig into a little bit more details about the climate and the specific elements that make Snoqualmie Pass so unique. So Snoqualmie Pass, like a lot of other places in the Pacific Northwest, sees a lot of precipitation in the winter and not so much in the summer. And so over the year, Snoqualmie Pass sees about 100 inches of precipitation. To give you an idea of how much that is, that's about twice as much as any major city sees in the US, and more than, or almost 3 times as much as Seattle sees. And you can see as we go through the year, it really ramps up in this October, November, December, January timeframe before slowly dropping off as we get closer to the summer. And then if you look here, you can see these lines, and these are plotting the average temperature. And an interesting thing about the average temperature is that during the summer, Snoqualmie Pass is pretty warm. It gets up to about 70 degrees on average for highs. Lows stay in kind of that mid 40-degree range. But as we go towards the winter, temperatures really drop off. And in like the heart of the winter in January, the average temperature is just above freezing, and the low temperature is in the low 20s. That's significantly colder than any place in Western Washington, like Seattle. So we're going to be talking about kind of what allows that to occur. This is looking more at snowfall. So this is average monthly snowfall. And if we go a little bit back, you'll see that we get quite a bit of precipitation in October, but most of that falls as rain. You get less than 10 inches of snowfall in the average October. But once we get to November, December, and January especially, we're picking up over 100 inches of snowfall. And this is actually more snowfall in January than a place like Alta receives in any month on average. This line shows kind of the average progression of how the snowpack builds over time. This is taken on the first of the month, with the exception of November, which is kind of in the middle of the month. And you can see that we start out kind of in November with about a 10-inch snowpack. We build to 20, then to 50. And by February and March, when the snowpack is peaking, it's in kind of that 80 to 100-inch range, which is pretty substantial and also pretty comparable to a very snowy place like Alta. This more shows the spread of snow depths over time. So this is for every year back to the 1930s and 1920s. And this orange line is kind of the current year up through the middle of January. And what you can see is, once again, it kind of peaks right about 100 inches on average, but you can have some quite wild spreads. So this line up here near the top, the snow depth got to 200 inches. And that was in the 1955 to 1956 year. And then you can see some of the lowest years down here where like you almost never built the snowpack up at Snoqualmie. And this is a different kind of graphical interface of that, where we can see once again our average snowfall right around 420 inches a year. You can see that kind of that standard deviation, so it's about 120 inches. So you might get up to maybe 550 inches and down to maybe about 300 inches during any one year. But once again, this extreme year, 1955 to 1956, where you got over 800 inches of snowfall at Snoqualmie Pass at 3,000 feet in the Cascades. And then our other extreme down here with the 2014-2015 season, Snoqualmie Pass barely picked up 100 inches of snow. Now I'm going to pass it off to Kyle, and we're going to dive a little bit more into those details, like I mentioned before about like those geography and microclimates.
Thanks, Wyatt. So there's three key characteristics of Snoqualmie Pass's geography that really influence its weather. The first thing is that it's the lowest pass at 3,000 feet in the Washington Cascades, and that allows cold and dry air to filter in from eastern Washington. Secondly, it's one of the westernmost points in the Cascade Crest, and that makes it wetter and gets a lot more moisture. Also, it's within the Puget Sound Convergence Zone, and that can create periods of enhanced precipitation during certain weather events. This graphic here shows the hydrological crest of the Cascades. That's mapped with the red line. So water to the east of it will flow into the Columbia Basin. Water to the west of it will flow towards Puget Sound. So this is what people commonly refer to as the Cascade Crest. But notice that it moves east and west pretty substantially. And the amount of mountains that are west of the crest play a big impact on the weather. So Snoqualmie Pass has only 15 miles of mountains to the lowlands to the west, whereas Stevens Pass has 29 miles. And further north around the North Cascades, there's 64 miles. So that means that Snoqualmie Pass, there's fewer mountains to the west to kind of soak up that moisture, and it really affects the weather of Snoqualmie. This is an elevation profile from the Canadian border on the left to the Oregon, or down towards Rainier on the right. And you can see that Snoqualmie Pass is by far the lowest pass. So in the North Cascades, most of the passes are around 5,000 to 6,000 feet, and the peaks are higher. Down around Stevens, the passes come down to 4,000 feet. But Snoqualmie Pass is like by far the lowest, definitely an anomaly in the Cascades. So in the winter, the weather tends to be actually colder in Eastern Washington than Western Washington. I know that people commonly think of Eastern Washington as a desert, that it's hot, but that very factor of being a desert is what allows it to be cooler during the winter. So it doesn't have the moderating influence of the Pacific Ocean, which is always about 50 degrees. So in central Washington, eastern Washington, the air is able to cool off a lot during the winter with the shorter days and radiate heat. Additionally, you can get cold air filtering in from British Columbia into eastern Washington. So this is a mean January temperature graphic. And you can see that while Western Washington generally sits in the low 40s in January, Eastern Washington is around freezing or a little bit below freezing, even in the Columbia Basin. This is a graphic that shows the average monthly temperature for Snoqualmie and Paradise. Paradise is on Mount Rainier at 5,400 feet. And during the summer, Snoqualmie Pass is substantially warmer than Paradise by almost 10 degrees. But notice during the winter, Snoqualmie Pass is actually just as cold as Paradise, despite being 2,400 feet lower. And that is due to the influence of easterly air, that cold air in eastern Washington is kind of seeping over the pass and keeping Snoqualmie Pass significantly colder than it should be, purely based on its elevation. Another effect of the colder temperatures in eastern Washington is that you get easterly gap winds. This happens because cold air tends to be more dense. So denser air creates high pressure. And oftentimes we have lower pressure in Seattle or low pressure storms approaching from the Pacific. This creates a pressure difference, and the air wants to move from high pressure to lowest pressure. Well, how can it do that? The easiest way is through the lowest passes. So generally wind tends to go through Snoqualmie Pass during these events. And so that's bringing colder air up to the pass, keeping it cooler, but it's also creating a lot of wind at the pass. So this shows the winds kind of ripping through Snoqualmie Pass in this forecasted graphic. You can see it's much windier on the I-90 corridor than anywhere else in the Cascades. And that's because the denser air is trying to escape to Western Washington. Another effect of the easterly air is to create interesting precipitation types. Oftentimes you have that cold easterly air coming in at the low levels, like around the pass, but you might have warmer Pacific air coming from the west aloft. So it is possible to have warmer air above and cooler air below. And oftentimes the warmer air will melt the snow in the upper atmospheres, causing it to rain down on Snoqualmie Pass. But sometimes there's cold air pooled at the pass, and that rain will freeze on contact, creating freezing rain, which makes for really treacherous driving conditions and just is nasty in general. If that cold air pocket is stronger, you might get sleet, and the rain might turn back to snow. And I've even seen situations where it's kind of raining up at 5,000 to 6,000 feet at Snoqualmie Pass, but it's still like sleeting at the pass, and actually much better snow at the pass, interestingly. And then sometimes that easterly air is just strong enough that it holds snow at the pass when you're driving up to the pass, and it's raining all the way to the pass, and then suddenly turns to snow. So that's really the power of easterly air. Another aspect, as we said, of easterly flow is wind and fog. So the red arrows show the path that wind tends to take. And if you look at a weather model, it's just going to kind of show general winds, east winds at the pass. But the winds really are trying to follow like the lowest gaps. So the main column of air typically moves down the reservoir and then up over Snoqualmie Pass. But Snoqualmie Pass kind of makes a U-turn. So the winds often rip up the Alpental Valley and over the Snow Lake Divide towards Snow Lake, and kind of escaping to the middle fork of Snoqualmie. And then winds also often go over Windy Pass, which is down around Mount Catherine. It's appropriately named Windy Pass. So these different gaps can really funnel strong winds. And it's really incredible that if you just get a mile or two from these gaps, it's often much, much less windy. Now, the blue line shows what is the typical fog line. So on these easterly flow days, you'll know it because you're driving up the I-90 corridor, and around North Bend, your car gets slammed by a strong gust of wind. And oftentimes it's bluebird and sunny as you drive up the western I-90 corridor. And as you get to Snoqualmie Pass, you see a fog just kind of pouring over the pass. And that's because as the easterly air rises towards Snoqualmie Pass, the moisture can condense and clouds form. Additionally, some of that western air that's more moist can kind of mix with that easterly air, and it really produces the strongest fog right at the pass. So this photo on the bottom left is a photo taken from Granite Mountain, which is just a mile or two west of the pass. And you can see the easterly flow pouring over the pass, kind of engulfing the ski areas in a dense fog, and then the clouds break up right at the pass. These other two photos on the right are photos of the Snow Lake Divide, and you can see the clouds just like a fluid kind of pouring over the divide, but they break up, the moment they get over the pass. On those days with easterly flow, eastern Washington is often, just in kind of this dense fog down low. But if you get above it, the nice thing is if you get further east from Snoqualmie Pass, or just kind of out of that main corridor of wind, you can often find a lot more pleasant conditions, calm conditions. So this was a day where the winds were ripping at the pass, but we went further east and we found, really calm temperatures and calm winds and nice skiing. So now Wyatt's going to focus on the second characteristic, which is the western position of Snoqualmie Pass.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to note, like whenever you're trying to get over the mountains, it is just so much shorter to get to Snoqualmie Pass than anywhere else. And partly that's because of the infrastructure. The biggest and widest highway goes over Highway I-90. So it gets you there quite quickly, but it's also just much closer. So we can see basically we're at Snoqualmie Pass in this photo. And you can see that you can see Seattle basically, and also the Olympics in the distance. And so that means that because you're not too far, the precipitation doesn't have to travel through too many mountains to get to Snoqualmie Pass. It gets a significant amount of precipitation at the pass. It's kind of right in the center of where the air tends to converge and drop all of its moisture. And so that's why, as I mentioned earlier, Snoqualmie Pass picks up about 100 inches of precipitation a year in this kind of purple magenta color. And you can see that it is really in this like ideal position where if you go too far west, then you're not getting nearly as much precipitation, and too far east, then you're moving towards the rain shadow of the Cascades. And if you go even like far enough east, you can see down here, this is kind of in like the Yakima area, which is actually one of the driest places in the US. The only spot that's drier really is some of the deserts in California, like Death Valley. So this area picks up fewer than 10 inches a year. So this is a really, really strong, important feature that allows that precipitation to fall. Of course, since most of that precipitation falls in the winter, a lot of it falls as snowfall. This is an average annual snowfall map, and you can see that Snoqualmie Pass right here is kind of right in that 30 to 40 feet. So kind of around 400 inches of annual snowfall. And once again, if you go too far west, it drops off very quickly. Seattle only sees maybe 5, 6, 7 inches of snowfall a year. And then you get 50 times that amount just by going an hour east and 3,000 feet up in elevation. You can see this. This shows kind of the average annual snow depth over the winter. And so this is for Olalley Meadows, which is slightly higher than Snoqualmie Pass. This is at 4,000 feet, but this is the SNOTEL site that is closest to the pass. So the snow depth peaks in about the April timeframe. And this is snow water equivalent. So this is, imagine if you melted down all of the snow in a column at kind of Snoqualmie Pass or this Olalley Meadows at the deepest point of the year, there'd be 60 inches of water, even though that the snow depth is significantly deeper than that. And so this is quite high. This is 60 inches is pretty significant for any sort of ski area. We're going to compare it now to some places kind of to the west and a little bit to the east. So we're going to look at Lynn Lake, which is this location right here compared to Olalley Meadows, which is much closer to the pass. And you can see that even though they're about the same elevation, they're both close to 4,000 feet. Olalley Meadows has almost twice the average kind of max snow water equivalent. So it's around 60 inches versus Lynn Lake, which is much closer to 30 inches. So in that case, we've gone too far west. Now we'll look at a little bit further east. So we have Olalley Meadows here again, and then we'll go to Stevens Pass. Once again, similar elevation, but Stevens Pass is a little bit too far east. The precipitation has to go through kind of too many mountains. And that means that once again, while it tends to be cold enough for snow, you might not get quite as much of that snow falling. So it's only about 40 inches compared to Olalley Meadows closer to 50 or 60 inches. And really, Olalley is in kind of, or sorry, Snoqualmie Pass is in kind of this Goldilocks zone where it's not too far west and it's not too far east. And it's just the perfect spot to see as much precipitation as possible. Another interesting feature is the Convergence Zone. So if you're familiar, if you live in kind of the Puget Sound or Seattle area, you're probably pretty familiar with the Convergence Zone because what tends to happen is that we see winds coming off the ocean and they come around the Olympics. The Olympics are in the 6,000 to 7,000 foot range. And instead of going over the top of them, which the air does a little bit, but it finds an easier route to go around them through this low elevation Chehalis Gap to the south and through the straits up here to the north. And what happens is as that air comes back around, it ends up colliding into each other and causing a convergence of air. And generally what happens is when you have cold air that is converging in this manner, it's forced upwards because it doesn't have anywhere else to go. And that causes cooling and precipitation to fall. And so we have kind of two different routes that this precipitation generally takes to takes. So generally our storms come in from the west. And as it converges, you get a convergence zone kind of in the Seattle area, maybe a little bit further north, maybe a little bit further south. And because it's coming from the west, you might have a little bit generally cooler air and more of that rainfall coming. We also get a lot of our storms coming from kind of the south and west, and you can get a convergence zone up near like Skagit County versus kind of Everett or Snohomish County or down towards King County in Seattle. But that also air tends to be a little bit warmer and you don't get quite as much convergence through that warmer air. So if you have an atmospheric river, you generally won't see a convergence zone form. Where if you see more westerly air or even coming from the northwest, you'll see a stronger convergence zone form. So the cool thing is we can look at these radar loops from these storms. So this is from 2022, and you can see that we get this convergence zone forming kind of in this northern area and also down towards Snoqualmie Pass. And it's just kind of continuous precipitation falling, and it tends to be quite intense precipitation. So you might see like 9 inches of snow in only a couple hour period. This led to 9 inches of snow overnight. We can also look at this pattern. So that last pattern was a more westerly flow. This is a more northwesterly flow. So this tended to be colder. This, I believe, actually had snow falling almost all the way down to the surface. And you can see this convergence zone feature down here, which is from the Olympics. And you have it pretty intense over Snoqualmie Pass. I-90 is this red line right here. And you're also getting convergence from actually Vancouver Island, which is pretty cool to see and moving down through Skagit County.
Thanks, Wyatt, for all that great in-depth analysis. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and really came to appreciate like how unique of a place Snoqualmie is to be so close to a major metropolis that sees basically no snow and actually be one of the snowiest places in North America. This is actually just part one of a multi-part video we're going to do on Snoqualmie Pass. So we have a future video coming out that's going to focus on weather forecasting and resources for Snoqualmie Pass. So if this video was interesting to you, or that future video sounds interesting, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel, Cascadia Mountain Weather. And we also do weekly weather videos where we look at the forecast and we kind of figure out how to dissect that and determine, what form of recreation, what kind of things you want to think about while planning your weekend adventures. So we'd also like to give a highlight to our Patreon, and we'd like to give a shout out to all our supporting patrons. These people support us, and in return, they get access to exclusive recreation recommendations. So every Thursday evening, we send out an email with really in-depth analysis, talking about different zones of the mountains of the Cascades and Olympics to explore, what types of activities, what kind of considerations you want to look at. So if that kind of information is really interesting to you, or you just like to support us, we encourage you to visit our Patreon at cascadiamountainweather.com, or you can go to the link in our show notes. So thank you to everyone for listening, and we hope you have a great day.